Breakfast is Tech Talk, Tech Talk, Tech Talk, Tech Talk, Tech Talk, Tech Talk, Tech Talk with Matthew Dixon.
Yeah, all these buzzings and whatnot. Hey, you have to walk around with, especially blokes' hands in particular laptop positions or loincloth positions, don't you?
I'm not sure what you mean, Richard.
Don't you? Mate, we're into 5G, aren't we, Matty?
We are 5G,
5G.
now, yeah.
What happened to 4?
It's still there, and 4G will still
What
be
happened
relevant.
to 3?
Well, 3G's
2?
3G is going to be turned off in 2023. 2G was turned off in 2016. 1G was turned off. Oh, I'm trying to remember now. Probably around 2003. So they've been actually earlier than that. Yeah, 1998. I think 1G was turned off. So
What was 1G?
So there's actually a 0G, believe it or not.
There's not.
There was a 007 mobile phone system that started in 1981, and it wasn't very good. It was just a huge thing in the boot of your car, and you couldn't drive around and have phone calls as you drove. You had to stop the car and talk because it didn't hand off. So it wasn't very successful, and so basically that was a bit of a start.
So it's a souvenir.
It was, if you had one now, it would definitely be a souvenir. But 1G was 1987. We started off in 1987. They had 1G, which was the analog, which generally referred as the analog system, and it was used for phone calls because that's what we did back then.
But we still had hardline.
We still had physical phone lines. Yep. Not many people. It was the yuppies, if you remember, back in 1987. If someone walked into a pub with a phone in their pocket, it was a pretty big pocket for a start.
Was that the Motorola?
They had Motorola brick phones, they had NEC P3s. The brick phones.
Yeah.
They'd be worth something now. I think some museum would like that in good condition.
They're great paperweight.
They are now. So 1G was fine, but then GSM or digital started to be introduced at different places around the world. So we jumped on that in about 1993 in Australia. And that really gave us the ability to do things like text messages. Wow, wasn't that great? So some people might argue that was a bad thing. But the idea of that was that suddenly we realised that the mobile phone network could be used for a little bit more than just a phone call. So you could do other things that were data related. And text messages were the first things that were data related. So that started off and away it went. And as we worked out we needed more speed and more connections.
Who said?
I think industry decided to try and work out to develop things and be able to do more things. Right. And then they wouldn't have been developing it if consumers didn't want it. Now, sometimes you don't know that you want it. We didn't know we wanted text messages, Richard, until someone came out and said, hey, you can do text messages. Oh, that's pretty cool. 1 or 2 text messages go. Suddenly, millions of text messages go.
Did competition push one another company up?
All the organisations that will design networks around the world are always trying to come up with the next thing.
That's right.
And then if they're good enough, if their system is good enough, then it may be adopted as a standard around the world. So
can't they patent their ideas so another company can jump on it?
Absolutely. So then if they're the one that comes up with the idea, then that's where they'll make some good money out of everyone else having to pay them an amount for their concept, their idea, their patent they've got. But all organisations are trying to be the next one to introduce the next killer feature or the next killer set.
Okay, so we had the big Motorola.
Yeah.
The phone shrank until we had then the marvellous Flip.
Yeah.
And where were we at the Flip? What G was that?
Yeah, the Flip, some of those were 2G and then 3G as well.
Right.
So we
all of a sudden went to 2 to 3.
So 3G was around about 2003, 3G was introduced, and that's going to be phased out in a couple of years' time. So it's going to have about a 20-year lifespan. And 3G really got to the point where we could have some data. You could connect up. I remember some old phones, you could connect to a notebook, to a laptop, and actually send data, but it was terribly slow, but it was good enough if you're out in the field and you were desperate to get on the internet or desperate to send an email, but it was pretty clumsy and slow. And so the real focus then was not about phone calls. Most of the manufacturers and the industry decided that we've nailed phone calls, let's see what we can do in data. And that's where 4G came about. 4G was just about 3 things: speed, speed, and speed. Right. So 2013, 4G was introduced. And again, that'll be around, my guess would be, for probably 20 years from that point. So about 2033, mark my words here, and that's a very rough estimate that maybe 4G will be phased out by 2033.
Now we've got 5G.
5G was introduced in Australia last year. We were one of the early adopters around the world, and
Dubbo's
got it.
Compared to 4?
5G will give you 3 main things. A dramatic increase in speeds. We're talking about 10.
How fast can it get?
Well, that's the thing. There's no desire for the public to say, I want to go slower, thanks very much. They always want to go faster, but it gives you speed. It gives you more connections, and that's really important. So when you go to a footy match in Sydney at a big stadium, sometimes you can't make a phone call or you can't send that Instagram photo out because there are too many connections in that one place. when we had Dubbo's One Night Stand here, there were so many connections there, no one could make a phone call or send a text because, again, the network couldn't handle that many connections. 5G can handle more simultaneous connections. And the other thing that's important is low latency. So in other words, the lag time between you doing something on your phone and you getting a response is much lower with 5G, and that's really important when we get to things like self-driving cars, where a few milliseconds mightn't mean much to you and I, but it makes a dramatic difference when a car's on the road travelling along at 100 kilometres an hour.
6G.
6G has already started in development. I can't give you a date, I'm sorry, about when
What
6G will be
do?
here. I think 6G...
It'll be so fast you won't even have to do any buttons because it'll be thinking about what you're thinking.
Well, it'll be like the old Jack Gibson quote about Andrew Rettinghouse.
That's
He'll
right,
be in bed, he'll turn the light off, be in bed before it gets dark.
That's right.
It'll be doing things before you even realise.
Ludicrous, man.
So I think what will happen with 6G is that whole thing with simultaneous connections, where that's important, is with what's called the Internet of Things. So there are lots of things that have been connected. So bridges will be connected to the internet so that if there's any movement in a bridge, it's already notifying someone at the place that's doing maintenance of the bridge to say there's some movement there, go and fix it up before they do a physical inspection. So Internet of Things are lots of things, like lots of cars are already part of Internet of Things. Yes. So 6G will be able to say, we've got all those simultaneous connections with 5G. Ha! I laugh at you. I can do so many more connections. Yeah, that's
I
right.
wave my private parts in. Yeah.
That's it. So it will be able to do, in my mind, more simultaneous connections. I'm not sure they'll get latency much lower because latency is limited by the speed of light, 3 by 10 to the 8 metres per second. But speed and simultaneous connections, I think, will be where 6G will go. 5G to be introduced. I don't expect 6G to be rolled out in Australia until maybe 2025, thereabouts. Don't hold me to that, but somewhere around that sort of time frame. So we've got a few years with 5G yet.
How many messages in our conversation now, Matthew Dickinson, have been sent? How many?
Millions.
Billions, perhaps.
Well, in Australia, you would say, and I should look at that research for you for next week, but I would suggest that there would be somewhere in the vicinity of a few million messages a minute sent in this country, text messages. They are phenomenal in terms of the number of messages. So,
where do they go once they've been read and once it's had? Well, who stores all this stuff?
So it'll go to your phone, and then most of the telcos will store it on their service for a short period of time, not forever. There'll be a period of time that a message would still be there if, for example, a police investigation needed to subpoena a telco. But the idea is not for those to be stored. It would be just too much server storage space.
Where do they get stored?
In the cloud, so which is basically server farms somewhere. There are huge containers, huge buildings that are just full of servers.
So how friendly are they? How environmentally friendly is all this?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because what you find is that they're using up a huge amount of power. Like a data center is a big user of power, but the hope is that then you don't have all those servers required, say, on premise at people's buildings, and you don't necessarily have the amount of travel that might be required. So you might be using more electricity, but using less travel, because we can do things like Zoom meetings rather than get in a car and drive and meet with someone. So it's an interesting question. I should do some research on that one as well to see whether or not...
COVID's taught us not to meet anyone.
It has taught us that, and we've seen that's reduced pollution around the world because people aren't travelling by air, by cars anymore, or as much. So there's potential there for the IT industry to be very environmentally friendly, but it requires users to actually take advantage of it.
10G?
10G? You and I might not see 10G.
Don't know the way it's going. I reckon the next meeting, Zoom, old hat.
Yep.
Holograms.
Holograms, yeah.
Holograms.
Yeah, now you're talking.
Matthew Dickinson, yes. The world of it. I have to get my loincloth out now.
On to breakfast is Tech Talk, Tech Talk, Tech Talk, Tech Talk, Tech Talk, Tech Talk, Tech Talk with Matthew Dickinson.